So today I'm going to be walking through how I made this Esmeralda inspired outfit. The first part of the video is going to be more of a tutorial for how I made this underbust bodice. So it's not a corset, it's more of just like something you can wear as a belt. So that's going to be more of a tutorial. So if you're coming from that pattern, that is at the start. And then for the rest of it, I'm just going to be walking through how I made each piece. So I have my patterns shop linked below, and everything I've tried to make as beginner friendly as possible. So let's get on with the video. So I'm starting by working on this reversible bodice, which is this kind of greeny colour on one side, and then it's going to be black on the other side. So for the bodice, you're going to need two different colours or patterns of fabric. This should be a woven fabric with little to no stretch. I'm using 100% linen here, but you could also use a 100% cotton. I got this from Minerva, which is a really good place to have a look at their fabric. So I'm going to start by laying out my pattern pieces. So I'm going to do this on the blue because it'll be a lot easier to see. One thing I would also say about fabric is to make sure you don't use anything too bulky or too heavy. So for example, velvet wouldn't work super well with a reversible bodice just because it'll be too thick. So to lay my fabric out, I'm going to find the selvage edges, which will be your bound edges. So like these are raw edges, for example, whereas this has been bound so that it doesn't fray. So I'm going to place them together. So you should have two for your fabric and they should run parallel to each other. So I'm going to place them one on top of the other and lay my fabric out like this. So I've got two layers of fabric here. So this means I can cut both of the pieces for each pattern piece out at once because each one has two pieces. So I have 4 different pattern pieces for this project. So I've got my front piece, which is pattern piece 1, my front side, which is pattern piece 2, my side, which is pattern piece 3, and then my back piece, which is pattern piece 4. So all of these have got a grain line mark on them. So this grain line arrow should line up parallel to your selvage edge. So I'm just gonna lay these all out. If you want to be more precise about this, you can measure each end of the arrow to the end of the selvage edge. I'm just going to kind of guesstimate. I'm going to lay all of these out and then draw them onto your fabric. Like I said, this will mean that you can cut 2 out at the same time because you have 2 layers of fabric. So I'm just going to go in and draw them out now. I'm just zoomed in case you want to see a little bit better how they are laid out. But the only thing that is important is to make sure that your grain line is parallel to your arrow. So I've just drawn all of those pieces in place, and I'm going to go in and put a couple of pins just to hold the 2 layers of fabric together, and then I'm going to cut these out, and I'm also going to repeat the same thing for my interfacing. So this is the interfacing I'm using. This is a fusible interfacing, so I'm going to cut all of the same pieces out that I've cut out of the fabric, so I'll have 2 for each shape, and then I'll be back to show you how I'm going to attach them all together. So I've just finished cutting out all of my pieces for my interfacing. So what you have to think about here is that your 2 pieces that you've got for each pattern piece are going to go on opposite sides. So one of your pieces is going to be in this orientation and one will be in this orientation. So you need to make sure that when you add your interfacing, you've got one in each orientation. So for example, these 2 pieces, which are pattern piece 4, I've got one like this, and then you flip it and have one that way as well. So you're going to repeat that for all of your pieces. I'll show you with pattern piece 1 because it might be the easiest one to show. So that is pattern piece 1 in that orientation, and then you also want one flipped in that orientation. So then I can take my 2 pieces of interfacing, and one is going to go like that, and one is going to go like that. So you want to repeat that for all of your pieces. Obviously this is going to depend what kind of interfacing that you're using. If you're using a fusible interfacing like me, which is one that has glue on that can be melted, I'm going to press this on with an iron. If you're using a non-fusible interfacing, you can just take a hand stitch around the edge and kind of like roughly tack it in place. So I'm just going to go and attach all of my interfacing. Just make sure that you remember to have them in opposite orientations so that they kind of like face each other. So I've just finished adding interfacing to all of my pieces, and now I've laid them out how they need to be laid out to pin them together. And the easiest way to do this, because you have got some pieces that look very similar, is to use your pattern pieces. So they basically go 1 to 4 in order. So that one is your number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. So that's the easiest way to lay them out for each side. So this is going to be one side, and then this is going to be on the other side. At this point, you also might want to mark in your eyelets. So the best way to do that, I just like to poke a hole through each of the guides. And then lay that on top of your 4th piece, and then just use a pen to mark those in place. And then you can just flip the pattern and mark them on your other side. So now I'm just going to start to pin them together. So I'm going to take pattern piece 1 and 2, and on this curved edge of your pattern piece 2, I'm going to pin that around this edge of pattern piece 1. And then I'm just going to open that out and take pattern piece 3 and pin that to pattern piece 2. This is all with right sides facing together. And then open that out and take pattern piece 4 and pin that in place as well. And then open that out. And then I'm going to repeat the same for my other side. So then once you've got both of your pieces done, I'm going to put them right sides together and then pin along this edge of pattern piece 1. If it's easier, you can do these seams one at a time, so pin them in place and then sew them. I just find it easier to do everything all at once. And then once you fold that out, that is pretty much your full bodice shape in place. So now I've got a lot of seams to sew here, so I'm going to go down each one with a 1 centimetre seam allowance and a straight stitch. So I'm going to do all of those seams in one go. So I'm just going to start with where the 2 edges of pattern piece 1 meet, and I'm going to line up my sewing machine to about 1 centimetre. I've got it set to just my normal straight stitch. I'm going to start to slowly sew down this edge and then reverse to secure that stitch. And then just trim that off. So I've just got the 1 centimetre seam allowance with the straight stitch. I'm going to repeat that for every other seam that I've pinned. So I've just finished sewing all of my seams in place, and now I'm going to go in and press them open with my iron. So I'm just going to open them up like that and press along there so that everything is completely flat. So I've just finished pressing all of my seams open, and now you want to go in and do exactly the same thing with all the same steps for your second fabric. So I've just done that in my black fabric. So now I'm going to take both of these, and with right sides facing together, I'm going to place one on top of the other. And now I'm just going to go in and pin these together. So I'm going to pin straight along the top edge, straight along the bottom, and along the two sides as well. So I've just finished pinning along all of my edges, and the only place that I've left open is just the bottom of this third panel on this side, because this is the area that we're going to use to turn the bodice to the right side out. So I'm going to sew all the way along here and then stop about here, and then sew all the way around the top there and down both sides. So I'm going to do that with a 1 centimeter seam allowance again and a straight stitch. So just all the way along the bottom, up the sides, round the top, round this side, and then over to here, just leaving this section open here. So I've just finished sewing around those edges. You can see I've just left this section open here. So now I'm just going to go around the corners and along this top edge and cut small triangles so that it improves the fit a little bit. It takes some of the bulk out. So just in the corners like this, obviously you've got to be very careful not to cut through your stitch line. And then I'm just going to go along this top edge, because this top edge is slightly more curved than the bottom edge, so I don't tend to find that you need to do the bottom edge, although if you want to do it just to be on the safe side, you can. So I'm just going to cut all the way along this top edge. That will take a little while, and I'll make sure I do these corners as well. And then I'm just going to finish that top edge off camera. So then now I've just finished cutting all of these triangles in, I'm going to gently turn this to the right side out. I'm just going to really slowly push this through the hole that I've left. So I've just finished turning this to the right side out, and now I'm going to close up this hole by hand with a ladder stitch. So for my ladder stitch, I've just got this area where the hole is, and it has kind of folded itself in because of where the other seams are. So I'm just going to go on the top of that fold. I'm going to go in for one stitch, and then over to the black side, in for one stitch. Just zoom in a little bit. And then back over to the blue. And back over to the black. So I'm just going to do that for the length of the hole. So I'm going to come down here, and then I'm going to come back on myself so that I've got 2 layers of this stitch, and then I'm going to tie it off at this end. So I've just finished closing up that hole, and now I'm going to add a top stitch, which is something I normally avoid with reversible products just because it's quite difficult to get the stitch looking the same on both sides, and it means you have to find a colour thread that matches both sides, which is quite difficult with this one. But because I used linen, it is still quite bulky, and the seams aren't sitting flat. So if I had used a 100% cotton, I imagine I would be skipping this step. So this is completely optional. But I'm just going to take my stitch straight along this edge, kind of going by where the seam is. I'm just going to go along here. And then I'm going to do the same on the bottom. I think I'm just going to use a blue, or see if I've got anything even closer to this one. And then obviously that's not going to look the best on the black side, but I can just colour it in with a fabric pen. So I think that will solve that problem. So I'm just going to go in and do that top stitch and show you when I've done it. I've actually just realised I can leave black thread in the bobbin and then use blue as the top thread. So then this side will be blue and this side will be black. I don't know why I've never thought to do it like that before, but I'm going to do that. So I've just finished doing my top stitch. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see. So you should be able to just about see. I've gone as close to this bottom edge as I could on the top and bottom. I did switch out the thread that I was using for this colour to a slightly lighter one, and now you can't see it as much. So yeah, if you do decide to do a top stitch, just follow along this edge as close as you can. And then for the black side, I have gone in and just coloured in any bits that you could see of the thread. So now the only thing left to do is to add your eyelets to each end. And obviously this is going to depend what tool you have to do your eyelets. I'm going to be using this one, which is by Hemline. It is pretty good. You punch the hole with one side and then add the eyelets with the other and using a hammer. But if you can get the eyelet pliers, I think they're a little bit better. So I'm going to add them off camera just because it's very, very loud, and then I will be back to show you. So I've just finished adding my eyelets. Now I'm just going to lace it up with some of this velvet ribbon, and then the bodice is done. So now I'm going to move on to making the basic dress, which is just going to be sleeveless, and then this top is going to go over the top. So for this part, I'm going to be using a 4-way stretch fabric. I've got cream for the top part and this lilac-y kind of colour for the skirt. I'm pretty sure these are both 95% cotton, 5% elastane. And I think they were both from Jelly Fabrics, either Jelly Fabrics or Minerva. So I'm going to start by laying my fabric out to cut my pattern pieces. So for the dress, I'm going to be using my Lola pattern. So from that pattern, I've got pattern piece 1, which is the scoop neck side of the top. I am going to be cutting this into a V-neck in a second as well. And then I've got pattern piece 2, which is the high neck side of the top. This I'm going to be using for the back. Pattern piece 3, which is the pocket, and pattern piece 6, which is the skirt, which I've already cut to the knee length guide. You can also cut it to the midi section, which is a little bit lower, but I've already cut that off for this project. So I've actually just decided, instead of cutting into the scoop neck pattern that I've got, I'm just going to use this one that I've already got, which is from my Harry pattern. I will make it available as well though, so that you've got the V-neck. I'm not going to do it quite as deep as this though. I think I'm going to do it to about here. So I'm going to start by drawing out all my top pieces. So I've just got my fabric for the top laid out here. I know it's probably a little bit tricky to see, but I've done a double layer of the fabric because I'm going to be cutting 2 of each pattern piece. So you can either do it like this or you can cut them all out separately. It doesn't really matter, but this is definitely easier. So I'm going to take my V-neck one and I'm going to cut 2 of them out. So I'm just going to draw that out. Pin the 2 layers together so that they're easier to cut out, and then cut that one. And then again, the same for the high neck side. So I'm just going to draw 2 of these out and then cut them out. So you just want 2 of each of your top pieces. So I've just finished drawing those out. So I drew this V-neck slightly up from where it went to on the pattern piece, and then I also made them a little bit shorter just because I think they tend to suit me a little bit better just when the top's a bit shorter, because I myself am quite short. So I'm just going to go in with some pins inside the lines that I've just drawn. So I'm going to pin the 2 layers together and then cut them out. Obviously, if you have decided to do one at a time rather than doing the double layer, once you have cut them out, it is quite handy if you then pin them together like this. Also, I should say this isn't a problem for me because my fabric is block fabric with no right and wrong side, but if you do decide to do it like this with the fabric folded in half, you want right sides facing together. So you should be drawing on top of the wrong side here. So this is how they look when they're cut out. So you should have 2 pieces for each one, and they should be pinned right sides facing together. Like I said, if you cut them out separately, just pin them together now. Just make sure it's right sides facing together. And I'm going to put these to one side while I cut out my skirt pieces. So I've just laid my fabric out for my skirt, and this one is also folded in half. And then I've got the fold up at the top here because the skirt is going to be cut on a fold. So just grab my pattern. So this is what your pattern will look like, and I'm going to place it up against that fold, basically just so that you can cut 2 pieces of this out without having to cut 2 separately. So I'm going to do that twice. I'm going to line it up to that fold, draw it out, put the pins in like I just did with the top, and cut it out. And you want 2 of those, so 2 on the fold, and then they will fold out to be much bigger skirts. And then you also have your pocket piece, which for this one I am going to cut 4 out in total, but obviously because I've got the double layered fabric, it's going to be a lot quicker. I can just draw 2 out. If you have a fabric with a right and wrong side, which again I don't with this one, it's just a block colour, you'll want to draw 2 with this side facing left and 2 with this side facing right. So you just want to draw 2 like that and 2 like that, so that you have pockets in opposite orientations for each side. But with this fabric, it's not going to matter. So if you're copying this project exactly, you can just draw them out however, and it will be fine. So I'm going to go in and draw all of those out and cut them, and then I'll show you what I've got once I've done that. So I've just finished cutting out my pockets and my skirt pieces. So if I take these pins out, you can see that I've got 4 pocket pieces. Because they don't have a right or wrong side, they can work in opposite orientations to go on either side of the skirt. So that's what your pockets look like. I really need to iron this fabric. It's very, very creased. And then for your skirt pieces, I just remove the pins from this one as well. Show you what it looks like with the pins in. So this is my side that has the fold, and then I've got the pins all around the edge. So just remove them. So I've just got my pins removed, and then I can fold it out and you can see the full skirt piece. And then removing the pins on the other one, you've got your second skirt piece. So they will look something like that. And for now, I'm just going to put my skirt pieces and my pocket pieces to one side so that I can work on the top first. So I'll start with the V-neck side, although they are exactly the same instructions for both sides. So I'm going to start by going in and I'm going to sew around this armhole, around this neckline, and around the armhole on the other side. I'm going to use my overlocker. You can also use a zigzag stitch, and you want to make sure that you leave the top of these straps open and all around the bottom and the sides. So just around each armhole and around the neckline, and then I will be back. So I've just finished sewing around all of those edges around the neckline and the armhole, and now this is optional, but I'm going to add some flat braided elastic. This is 5 to 6 millimeters wide, and I'm just going to lay that right on top of the seams that I just sewed and sew it in place. So just lay that on top of that armhole and place it under here. And then I'm just going to use this finger to kind of guide it round. Just making sure that you don't stretch it as you are sewing it in place. And then just trimming that off. So then that looks something like this, and I'm going to repeat that for the neckline and for the armhole on the other side. Like I said, this is completely optional, but it will add a little bit of extra structure to the top, so I would recommend it if you can get some of this elastic. So that's how that looks once I have sewn along the armholes and the neckline and added my elastic. It doesn't matter which side you add the elastic to because they are obviously both the same colour. And then I have repeated the same thing for my high neck piece. So I'm going to take this V-neck one, just remove these last few pins and turn this to the right side out. I'm just going to remove the pins from this one as well. And then I'm going to take this one that is the right way out and place it up inside the one that's inside out. So just taking the straps and placing them up inside here and pinning that in place. And then the same for the other side. So just take my strap of the one that's the right way out and place it up inside the strap of the one that is inside out. And again, pin that in place. And then you'll have something that looks like that. And then I'm going to take my side seams of both pieces and pin down there as well. So here you will be pinning through 4 layers of fabric, same with the straps actually. So just pinning down that edge, making sure you're getting all 4 layers. And again, the same for the other side. And then you'll have something like that. And I'm going to go in, sew across the top of both straps and down the side of the top on both sides. So I'm going to use my overlocker. You can use a zigzag stitch as well. So I've just sewn across the top of the straps and down the sides of the top. Now I'm going to turn this to the right side out. And you will have something like this. So at this point, I would probably normally go in and do some top stitching, but because I know that there's going to be a top going over the top of this, which is going to be the tie front with the long sleeves, I don't think I'm going to bother with it. It seems like it might just be an unnecessary step. But if you do want to add a top stitch, I would recommend following around the armhole and then around the neckline, so around like this, just with a zigzag stitch. So just follow along this seam that you've got here with a zigzag stitch, just around there and around the armholes. So now I'm going to move on to the skirt part. So I've got one of my skirt pieces here and 2 of my pocket pieces, so I'm going to add them first. So I'm just going to line this up with the top edge of the pocket lined up with the top edge of the skirt, and the straight edge of the pocket lined up with the straight edge of the skirt. So I've just grabbed my pocket pattern piece so that you can see a bit more clearly. So it's going to be like this. So I've got the top edge of the pocket lined up to the top edge of the skirt, and then this straight edge of the pocket with the straight edge of the skirt. So I'm going to do that on both sides and then just pin it in place. And then once you've added that to both sides of your skirt, I'm just going to go down and sew along this edge with my overlocker. Again, you can do it with a zigzag stitch, and just repeat that for both of your skirt pieces. So I've just finished adding those pockets. I'm just going to fold them out and then take my second skirt piece and lay that on top of the other one with right sides facing together. And then I'm just going to pin straight down the ends of this one. So I'm going to pin along the top of the pocket, round the pocket, and then down to the bottom of the skirt. So I'll just do that and then show you so you get more of an idea what I mean. So I've just finished pinning it down this side. So I've gone along the top of the pocket, around the edge of the pocket and then straight down this side of the skirt, and I've done that on both sides. So now I'm going to go in and sew that in place with my overlocker. Again, you can use your zigzag stitch. Just make sure you only do the top of this pocket and not the top of the skirt. And obviously we're still leaving the bottom edge of the skirt open as well. So I've just finished sewing down both sides. Let me zoom in a little bit actually. So you can just see my seam along the top of the pocket, round the pocket, and then down this side of the skirt. And obviously I've done that on both sides. So now I can add my top to this. So I'm going to keep the skirt inside out, and I'm just going to open up this hole at the top here. And I've got my top still the right way out. So top is right way out and the skirt is inside out. I'm just going to place the top in there and then start to match up the seams. So I've got the side seam of the top here with the side seam of the skirt. I'm just going to pin that in place. I'm just going to kind of roughly pin that in place. I'm just going to kind of avoid the pocket. You can kind of fold that to one side when you're sewing it in place. And then I'm going to do the other side. So taking the side seam of the top again, just folding that pocket down and pinning in place. And then the same here. And then I'm just going to go the rest of the way around this, pinning everything in place. So you want to have the skirt, the top of the skirt pinned around the bottom of the top. If you want to make this more precise, you can find the quarter points on the top and the skirt, but I don't tend to do that and it seems to come out fine anyway. So I'm just going to finish pinning all of that in place. So I've just finished pinning around this kind of waist area. I'm going to go in and sew that with my overlocker. Again, you can use a zigzag stitch, and I'm just going to kind of fold these pockets out the way as I sew this in place. So I've just finished sewing around this edge, and now I can fold this out to the right side out. I'm literally just going to fold that like that. And then your dress is very nearly done. The only thing that you need to do now is to hem this bottom edge. Now, normally, the way that I would finish the edge would be to take some interfacing, lay that at the bottom edge, and just fold this up on itself, press it in place, and then sew it there with a zigzag stitch. But I think I'm going to try and finish it off with lace instead, because I think it will kind of look like the petticoat that Esmeralda has under her dress. And also because hemming this in the normal way with the interfacing takes forever. So I'm going to try it with lace instead. So just finding this bottom edge, I'm going to go from the side seam. I'm just going to take this lace. I got this on Amazon, I believe. And I'm going to sew that lace right on top of there with my overlocker, and then after that I'm going to fold it under, so it's just going to peek through like that. So I'm just going to go and sew that lace on first. So like I said, I'm just going to line it up to the bottom edge like that and sew along here. Just zoom in a little bit so you can see a little bit better. So that's your side seam. I'm just going to sew that along there, just at the very edge. So I've just finished sewing that lace to the bottom of the skirt. Now I'm just going to turn it under itself and then sew just along this top here, just so that it stays kind of folded where I want it to. So it will look like that when I've done. I'm just going to sew straight along there. So now I'm going to move on to making this tie front top. This will be a pattern on my Etsy, but I haven't posted it yet, so I don't know what the name is going to be. I also was going to make it fully white like it is here, but then I found this fabric, which I think is going to be perfect for it. So I'm going to walk through making this top. So I've just laid out my fabric. The pattern that I'm using for this one is intended for stretchy fabric, so I'm going to size up to the next size and hopefully it will fit fine. So for this pattern, I've got a piece for the sleeve. Zoom out a little bit. I've got a piece for my sleeve. I'm going to draw 2 of these onto my fabric, and there will also be a mark for your central point, so I'm going to draw that into my sleeves as well. I've got a piece for the tie front side of the top, so I'm going to draw 2 of these onto my fabric. I'm going to draw, I don't know if this has got a wrong or right side, I don't think it does, but if you have a wrong or right side, you need to draw 1 in this orientation and then flip it and draw 1 in the other. I'm just going to draw 2 of those. And then I also have just a regular high neck side of the top. I'm just going to draw 1 of those onto my fabric. So I'll go in and draw all of those out and cut them out, and then I will be back to show you what I've got. So I've just finished cutting all my pieces out. I did also forget to mention I found this fabric on Etsy. So I've got 1 piece for my high neck side, 2 sleeve pieces, and then 2 of my tie side pieces. So I'm just going to put the sleeves to one side for now. And then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take each of my tie side pieces and lay them right sides together with my high neck side and just pin that strap in place, and then just doing the same with the other side as well. So I'm just going to sew that in place just straight across the top of the strap. So I'm going to use an overlocker. You could just use a zigzag stitch or a straight stitch, depending on what kind of fabric you're using, but I'm going to use my overlocker. So I've just sewn those edges in place. And now I'm going to fold it out so that the right side is facing up, and now I can add my sleeves. So taking one of my sleeves, I'm just going to find this mark that I've left, which is the mark on the pattern that shows the central point. And then with right sides facing together again, just going to match up that point with the seam that I just sewed and pin that in place. So now I'm just going to go in with the top of the sleeve and pin it all the way around the rest of the armhole. So I've just finished pinning this in place. I know it's quite tricky to see because it is see-through, but when I fold it out like this, you can kind of see a little bit better the top starting to build shape with the sleeve. So I'm just going to go in and sew this sleeve in place, and then I'm going to repeat all of that on the other armhole. So I've just finished sewing these sleeves in place. Now I'm going to fold this down the middle so it is right sides together again now. And now I'm just going to pin down the sides of the top and down the sides of the sleeves. Probably quite tricky for you to see, so I'll pin down each side and then I will show you how it looks. So I've just finished pinning up both sides. So I've gone up the side of the sleeve and then down the side of the top, and I've done that on both sides. I'm going to go in and sew that with my overlocker. So I've just sewn down these edges, and I'm going to turn this to the right side out. And all that's left to do is to finish off the edges. Now I don't want to do a normal hem. That could be an option. Literally just fold it in on itself and sew that with a straight stitch. I don't think that's going to look the best. And there is also the option of using binding. I do have this gold binding that would probably work. So if you wanted to do binding, you literally just sew this over the edge like that. But I think that's probably going to be a bit too in your face with the gold. So I think what I'm going to do instead is to just go around the edges with my overlocker, but only on a single needle, and see how that looks. So I'm going to go and do that, and then I'll show you how it looks. And obviously I'm going to trim off, I don't know if you can even see, there is some blue of where I drew them out as well. I'm just going to trim that off as I go. So this is how it looks just going around it with my overlocker with one needle. I actually really love the way that that's come out, especially because it's come out kind of wavy. So I think that's going to look really nice. And then at that point, your top is done. So it just ties like this. I think that's going to look really nice over the dress. The final thing that I'm going to make is this piece of material that's going to tie around her waist. So this should be the quickest thing to make out of everything. So this is the fabric that I'm going to be using for this piece. I found this on Etsy and it's a 4-way stretch fabric. So I'm just going to fold it in half. So I've got the fold up here, and I'm literally just going to draw in like a big triangle into this. I'm not going to use any kind of pattern, I'm just going to wing it. So I'm going to draw that in and then I will be back. So I don't think you're actually going to be able to see the lines that I've drawn, but I've drawn a line up here, which will be where the waist sits. And for that measurement, I took my waist measurement and added 5 to draw this out. So hopefully that should mean it can go around my waist and there's still enough room to tie it. Sorry, I should have said I added 5 inches. I don't know if I said that or not. So I took my waist measurement, added 5 inches, and then that's what this measurement is here. So because this is folded in half, this will have an extra 10 inches around the waist once I cut it out. And then I literally just drew a line down here to match up to the fold down here. So I'm just going to cut that out. So this is what it looks like when it's cut out. And then because it was on a fold, you can just unfold it. I have just held it up against myself and it is a bit too long. So I'm just going to chop a bit off and then I am going to go and hem every edge. So to hem this piece, I'm just going to take my interface in, lay that against my edge and then fold up the hem into the interfacing. And then I'm going to take my iron and just press that in place. I'm going to do that the whole way around the piece, and then I am going to sew that in place with a zigzag stitch. So I've just finished my hems. So I've pressed all the way around and then went round with a zigzag stitch. So now that is completely finished and now I can try everything on.